Hi again, everyone. Welcome to you all. Um, Thanks so much for joining us. So I get we're all busy, and so it's fantastic to have you here. My name is Lucas Richert. I'm the Historical Director of the American Institute of the History of Pharmacy. I'm the George Erdung Chair in the History of Pharmacy here at UW-Madison. The panel that you're attending right now is called Publishing Landscapes Roundtable Discussion. It perhaps doesn't roll off the tongue that well, but I suspect the content will be better than the title of the session. So why are we holding this session? What's the rationale? I guess the idea behind this panel was simply to pull back the curtain when it comes to the academic publishing world to a certain extent. I mean, to be fair, much of it is mysterious to me still, and I suspect it's probably mysterious for our panelists. But look, we simply wanted to showcase some of what we do know. And so many of our participants, many of the authors who are attending this Farm Fest might not have experience in interacting with an editor or a journal insider or an acquisitions editor. And so today is a chance to ask questions about the process. Not only that, it seemed worthwhile to put together different types of experts from different parts of the publishing world and in different countries. As with the conference overall, generating a fruitful conversation has been crucial to my mind, at least. I've wanted to do this from the very beginning. And so to save time and make sure we have tons of space for questions, I'm just going to jump right in and introduce our speakers. They will share some ideas and some thoughts, maybe some tips or tricks. I don't know. We'll have to wait and see. And then we'll have a Q&A session with them and with you. So as a reminder, ask questions in the chat box, and we'll do our absolute best to address them. So let me just introduce our speakers in the order that they will talk. I'm sure that they'll repeat their names and what they do, but first of all is Toni Gunnison at the University of Wisconsin Press. She's the journal's manager. She currently oversees 10 different journals and the staff at UW. If I'm missing anything, Toni, please add it in. Following on from Toni is Kyla Madden at McGill Queen's University Press, where she's the senior acquisitions editor, acquiring in health studies and the history of medicine, as well as in other fields. And finally, Dr. Arnab Chakraborty is going to speak. He's currently the assistant editor at Medical History, that's in the UK, and the book review editor for the Social History of Alcohol and Drugs. His PhD is from York University, and he's currently a research associate at the Center for Global Health. So I'm going to be quiet, and I'm going to turn it over first to Toni, then Kyla, and then Arnab.
Thanks, Luke. I'm starting my video here. This is Toni Gunnison, as Luke said. I want to make a teensy correction and say that we will now be publishing 12 journals, not 10, which, yeah, we're very excited about. And I just thank you so much for asking me to be part of this today. I don't have an extensive background in pharmacy publishing, but I have been at the University of Wisconsin Press since 2007, which makes me kind of a grizzled elder in the publishing world. And I thought that what I could talk about is kind of a strategic view of where publishing, at least in terms of university presses, where it's at right now. That's what I know best, and I'm very happy to answer any questions that anybody has afterwards. And even after this talk, you're welcome to contact me directly. I'll have my information in the slide deck that I prepared. If I can figure out again how to share my screen. So, again, I just want to talk about the kind of the publishing landscape for university presses and more broadly, nonprofit presses. And I wanted to start with a history of, for the last perhaps 30 years, maybe not even quite 30, but I wanted to, sorry, let me back up and say one more thing. In that I kind of lurk on some online forums and I hear what authors and researchers and librarians have to say about publishers, and it's can be pretty scathing sometimes. And I think that what we do, especially in nonprofit publishing, is valuable and worthwhile, and really meant to support the academy. And I just try to open a dialogue between people and represent university presses when I can. So I wanted to explain the history in the 80s and 90s and even into the 2000s when the World Wide Web became a thing and people started to want their articles and their journal content online. And that happened for us beginning in the 2000s, but not fully until 2010. This is something, we largely publish humanities and social science journals, as do most university presses. And for university presses, or sorry, for any publishers, there is more money available in the STEM publishing fields. And so you might notice that there's kind of a division between places where those journals are published and places that focus more on humanities and social science. And those publishers that publish largely in STEM fields, they really have more money to invest in technology. And so they made that transition a little bit earlier. But in any case, everybody kind of started making a move to go online sometime between, say, 95 and 2010. And one of the side effects that happened for us at that time was that libraries where on a campus like University of Wisconsin, my home institution, used to have perhaps 10 subscriptions for a journal, and each like individual library or department would have a subscription for a journal. And now with things being online and people using online resources, that kind of consolidated to one central subscription for the main library, which decreased our revenue significantly. And then the next thing that happened is for-profit publishers started bundling their publications in something that you might have heard referred to as the big deal. And the big deal is a package of sometimes related journals. Sometimes they're not necessarily that related, but they may be all the journals from a publisher. And the librarian will purchase a subscription to that. And it gives them access to a lot of content, which can be fantastic for smaller journals and smaller programs that might not have as big of an audience. But it also, on the other side, it tied up library budgets quite a bit. And I've talked to them here at UW Madison, and I think that the number I was told is that 90% of the acquisitions budget is tied up in these packages, and they only have 10% of their budget available after the fact for individual subscribers. So that's a little bit of the library side of it. And then, of course, after the Great Recession, after 2008, academic libraries have had their budgets cut pretty significantly. And they're really caught between those two pressures of having so much of their budget tied up in the big deal packages and also having their budgets cut. And those big deal packages, the prices do go up every year. So they're really in a really tough situation. And first world market saturation. We're facing a situation where for the first world, for the United States and Europe, most people have access to most of the top journals. That's not the case across the board, of course, but the places, the universities and the countries that have the most resources to invest in subscriptions pretty much have done so at this point. And I talked about this last item, the technology trickle down. I talked about this kind of in item number 1 about moving things online. I just wanted to point out that often things that happen in the STEM world and are more scientific and more technical, they happen there first, and then they move into humanities and social science publishing. So that's kind of the history of where we started and where we are now from the last 30 years. And then I wanted to talk about kind of where we are now and new opportunities that I see happening in the next 1 to 5 years. Obviously with SARS-CoV-2, and we're expecting tightening of university budgets, we think that it could be very possible that that affects library budgets. We don't know that yet. I hope that's not the case, but it could be. But on the flip side of that, some libraries are breaking up their packages with for-profit publishers and going for individual subscriptions. They're looking at a la carte subscribing again and just picking what they really need the most for their institution. So I think that you're going to see a lot of disruption in that area. There is a continuing push for open access. This goes back to the technology thing. I think this is incredibly useful for STEM publishing, where there are a lot of research grants and there's a lot of funding for publication. I think that one thing that gets lost in the discussions is that there isn't the same level of financial support for humanities and social science publishing. I hope that there is a solution that is thought of. I think that in an ideal world, we would love to publish everything open access, but making things open access doesn't take the costs of production away from publishing. You will see in the next couple years, I think you're already seeing it, but I think that you're going to see an increased push for diversity, or I should say, we are seeing this in a couple different ways. In our publishing, we are seeing more authors from across the world. We are seeing more submissions that are English as a second language, where we are working with copy editors and proofreaders and people to clean up the language and to make it more of a standard that we would want to publish, or in some cases we are publishing in a separate language, and we're getting more requests for that from our editors for various journals. And I think that I think it's kind of at the beginning of that, but I think that this is something you will see more of. I personally am watching and am interested in the Chinese investment in universities and research. I don't know where that is going exactly, but I know they are investing a lot of money. So I think that's something to watch. I know that I'm not sure what's going to happen with that, but I think it's definitely an area to watch. And the final item I have here is the possible changes in promotion and tenure committees. I know that this is kind of one of those things that people are perpetually talking about, but I think that there's going to be a move away from talking about what journals you have been published in, like their impact factor and other ways of valuing publications. And there may be changes coming in what kind of publications those committees accept. So these are things that I hear talked about, and these are things that areas that I see changing in the next couple of years. And they're areas for, just disruption and change, which I'm not sure how it will affect us, but it'll be interesting to see. And I just wanted to give a plug for nonprofit publishing. Obviously, we at the University of Wisconsin Press believe that we do a great job. And I just want to say that certainly in nonprofit publishing, no one is overpaid, and we are careful to be really thoughtful stewards of the resources that we do have available. We really try very hard to be careful with that. So if you were interested in supporting nonprofit publishing instead of profit publishing, where the money goes back to stockholders every year, here's some ideas that I thought I would share. When possible, think about subscribing for yourself. One of the things that happened when we moved to online is a kind of like institutional libraries cut back on their number of subscribers. We saw that change happen with individual subscribers too. We saw a lot of people that were able to get it online through their library. They kind of stopped subscribing. That varies by field. Some fields that's not true at all. Some fields it's more true. But if you want to support your local nonprofit press, we just really would encourage you to subscribe yourself. When possible, try to publish with a nonprofit press. It keeps resources within the academy and supports your local institutions. It's lovely if you can recommend journals to your libraries. This really does make a difference in whether they subscribe. If you are looking for a specific journal and you can't access it, it really does make a difference. Usage counts. If you are able to access the journal through a separate service such as Project Muse or JSTOR, that really is valuable to a journal too. It's not all subscriptions. Usage really matters. And I just wanted to give another plug for diversity and changing the landscape a little bit of academic publishing. I just encourage everybody to expand your circle a little bit and perhaps include younger scholars when you are able to. And again, we encourage you to tweet and share what you're reading on social media. We find, for some of our journals, we find that this is a very active area. The people are very involved, and it's a really fun way to connect with authors, connect with the editorial staff, to connect with anybody that has an interest in that topic. And that's kind of short and sweet, but that's what I have. My contact info is here, and I'm very happy to answer any questions that anybody has. Again, here or later after the fact, I'm happy to, you can contact me directly. And I am going to stop sharing the screen, I think, and then and I'm happy to take questions at that point.
Thank you, Tony. That's very good. There's a question from Joe Gabriel, and it is about open access by for-profit companies and the way it might be destabilizing university publishing. Do you want to address this now, or should we, as a group, address it at the end? Are you happy to address this question?
Either way, I'm happy to answer it either way.
Sure, go for it.
I'm personally fairly concerned about the discussions that are happening with around open access right now, because there's a great enthusiasm to move things to open access, but I can tell you that the bigger for-profit companies are not voluntarily giving up their profit to move to an open access business model. They're just shifting who is paying. And I think that there are some inequities in that model, in that the really big research universities, largely in the West, are funding that publication, and people in other places may not have the same access to resources and therefore may not be able to publish. That's one of my really big concerns. And so I'm concerned that it's not fair, and I'm also concerned that I just don't think that multinational for-profit corporations are voluntarily giving up a revenue stream. I think they're shifting things around, but I don't think it's. So wait, let me say this. So I think that one of the things that happens when people talk about open access is that they think it's a way of stabilizing or cutting publishing costs. And I think in the current models that are being proposed, I don't think that's happening. That's my personal opinion. I'm not sure if it answers the question, but that's my take on it.
Sure. You have another question. It's from Nancy Campbell. She asks, what's the basis for your sense there might be a move away from impact factors in US non-STEM academia? So you are saying that there might be a move away from impact factors in the US.
I am just hearing more. I'm just hearing more conversations about altmetrics, and it's not just altmetric. I mean, that's a particular company and one way of measuring impact. But I am one of the things I follow fairly closely is the Scholarly Kitchen, which is a blog published by the Society of Scholarly Publishing, and it is something that is coming up in their posts more often. And I'm sure I would have heard about it at the meeting this year if we had had a meeting. So yeah, it's through them that I'm hearing discussions about. People are starting. I've read some posts and heard some discussions about the possibility that the impact factor might be becoming less important, and people are looking for other ways of valuing. And in fact, Clarivate, I believe it is, that does the impact factor now. They are offering some new products, and they themselves are moving away from the importance on impact factor. So that's what I base that on.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm going to invite Kyle to speak now. If you have other questions for Tony, you can send her a direct message privately in the chat box as well, and hopefully she'll be able to answer those for you. Thanks again, Tony.
Hello, everyone. Hi, Luke. Thank you very much for the introduction. Thank you, Tony, for a really very interesting presentation. And I'm sure there'll be more questions about what you raised. And the little introduction I've prepared is going to be much less informative and interesting, I think, than what you just shared with us. But not knowing what the audience for this talk might be, I won't get too much into specifics about the publishing process as a book publisher, and invite any questions that you might have in the chat or after. So this will just be really a brief introduction to myself and to our press and the publishing that we do in the area related to the conference and to some of your research. McGill Queen's University Press is a book publishing press. We are based in Montreal and Kingston with offices in the United Kingdom as well, outside of London. We publish across the social sciences and humanities, around 150 new books each year. I acquire myself in different fields of history, and in the history of medicine is an important area for our list and for my list. We publish a book series, a long-standing series, Studies in the History of Medicine, Health, and Society, which is closing in on 60 books in the series. It's edited by Professor Erica Dick at the University of Saskatchewan and Professor Jim Connor at Memorial University. And it's a social history of medicine series that looks at interactions between the ideas and practices of medicine and their social impacts and social contexts. So that's a broad, but that is the emphasis of the titles in the series. And some of the books also take up contemporary issues and questions, but always bringing a historical lens to them. So it's through the contact that I've had in the history of medicine, through knowing Erica, through knowing Luke as well, and the books that I've worked on with both of them, excellent books that I hope you know. Erica Dick has published Psychedelic Prophets. This was a couple of years ago, a wonderful collection of letters between Aldous Huxley and Humphrey Osmond, who was a pioneering researcher in psychedelics and treatment for mental illness. It's really a fantastic collection. The two of them had a decade-long correspondence on all matters, including matters of consciousness and the mind. And Osmond introduced Huxley to an early psychedelic experience. Luke, we have published his book Strange Trips, which is about looking at, examining, breaking down, criticizing the boundaries between licit and illicit drugs, and when they are perceived as medical, when they are recreational, how even for individual drugs these categories break down and change over time. And it was through working on these books and through knowing them that I became aware, our press became aware of really the extent of new research that was being done in the history of drugs and pharmaceuticals and psychoactives. And I was seeing that myself attending the history of the AHM meetings, that I felt like more panels, more books that were being published. And it just seemed to be a growing area of research. So the idea was brought to us to perhaps publish a book series that could be consolidate and be a publishing home for some of this work. And it was brought to us by Erica Dick and Virginia Berridge, and with the support of the Alcohol and Drug History Society. And we were really delighted by the idea. We launched the series about 6 months ago, and in fact, the first book is just poised to come out. It's David Kuba's Taming Cannabis, on drugs and empire in 19th century France. And I believe there's a panel about it later in the conference, so I hope you'll tune in for that. And the series is called Intoxicating Histories. It invites books on really any aspect of the history of psychoactive substances across time, and really from any time period, from any region. We encourage submissions by authors and on topics that are outside North America and Europe, which are quite well served, increasingly well served. These literatures, less so outside these regions. So we hope there will be submissions, and that the series will reflect a truly take a globally minded approach to these questions. It was really fascinating to listen to the opening panel, the discussion with David and Nancy and Erica and Luke, just on and Axel on just what can this field be, the places in which it's contested, the new ways it has us look at old questions and assumptions. I was taking notes through that conversation, and which I'll return to and may have follow-up questions for some of the panelists. But yes, the idea of the series is to provide a publishing home for this research in its own right, and to connect with other areas, other historical fields as well. And I think that's how can I maybe just conclude as Tony did with, I think, like kind of words of encouragement. Sometimes we're asked, is publishing, is it it's changing, there are challenges, is there still kind of interest in books and publishing books, and does the book have a future? Does the printed book have a future? Our answer is yes, that there is a place, always a need for and a place for long form research and the long form exposition of ideas. And there is value in in spending time with an idea. There are ways in which there are challenges. There are wonderful opportunities that have opened up also for authors and for presses, through kind of democratizing things for working departments that are kind of massive trade presses, in being able to share widely news about books and about authors, to promote those works, to speak about them in podcasts. I listened recently to some wonderful interviews that really kind of have me wanting to read books, because I've heard these podcasts. So for the challenges that have arisen, there are many opportunities, and this work, peer-reviewed work that is really that is the product of years of research and expertise and reflection. It's important, and it will endure. And so we want to be your partners in making those books and making them available. And so, as I welcome any questions, and thanks for this opportunity, Luke.
Yeah, thanks. There's one quick question for you, Kyla, that's come in from Jacob Green.
Sure.
So I think what he's talking about is the trade book. And he asks, I've heard there's a move towards publishing semi-popular books, which would perhaps have a wider audience of presses like Yale or other presses for that matter. So what's your take on this trend? He's asking about if you've had success publishing books that have reached a wider audience. Do you have advice?
Yeah, and I think we make those assessments on a book by book basis. A term that we use sometimes is a crossover book. So if we maybe see a proposal, and by that we mean a book that may have the ability to break out of just an academic audience, and for reasons of its topic or just its timeliness, its particular accessibility or interest, or the profile of the author, it may have a readership outside an academic readership. So I think I know what he means by yeah, like a popular book, an accessible book. We would then look to price that book accessibly. We do that wherever possible with our books. That's important to us, to make the research we publish, the books we publish, as accessible as possible. But definitely for something we anticipate a wide audience, we would look to do that, to promote it to those audiences. So I suppose is it a trend? I suppose it's something I feel our press has actually been quite good at this. We've always been looking out for books that can do that, and ways to do that, and where we can connect good research and research expertise, translating that for a wider audience. We really look on that as fundamentally our mission as a publisher.
Can I ask you a quick follow-up to Jacob's question?
Sure.
Basically, someone approaches you at a conference and says, I have an idea. So what follows on from that? I mean, what is it that you're looking for?
Right. What's your idea? I think that my question would be, and in fact, hearing people talk about their research is wonderful. So even so, we always eventually like to get to the stage of having a proposal, but hearing somebody express ideas, even if those are in the form of questions, I think it's often a good starting place for authors. It is always welcomed by publishers. Eventually, we do need to see something on paper. And if the idea is very still unformed, that will also become clear at a conversation. And then it may be more, all right, well, here's questions I may have as an editor, someone who's not a specialist in the field. So I'm coming at you as your kind of eyes that are you need to explain this to me and explain its value and significance to me. So that may be helpful for an author. But if it's more developed and there's legs with it, that conversation can also turn into what might be then something they go away and write an outline for a book, an early draft of an outline. So that's not a question to be afraid of, however early.
Okay, you would encourage people actually to reach out to you.
Say, absolutely.
Hey, let's have chats. Yeah. Well, seeing no other questions in the chat box, I can only assume that people are cogitating and they are going to send you questions either privately or after Arnab has concluded.
Okay.
So thanks so much, and we'll let Arnab speak.
Thanks, Luke. And right. And absolutely, thank you for the final question to Kyla. I had the same question anyway. So, right, just two clarifications. I'm based at the University of York, which is at the UK, and my center is called the Center for Global Health Histories. Right, so thank you both, Tony and Kyla, and thank you. So I'm in this panel, but I'm honestly still learning every day, as I completed my PhD earlier this year. So I can right now speak both as an early career academic and as well as my editorial roles with two different journals. So basically what I'll talk about is mostly targeted at young scholars, early career academics, and PhD students probably who are trying to publish in good journals, basically. So what sort of steps you guys can take to approach a journal and get your articles published? So first of all, what I would say is try to find out about the journal that is best suited to publish your article. That's probably the first thing that you should do. And you can do it in different ways. You can browse through the past issues of the journals, of different journals, and that will give you a very good idea about what sort of articles the journal publishes, and then you go ahead with the process. talking about checking the past issues of journals, it's also very important when you have selected a particular journal, you check its house style and follow it to, edit your piece. So you need to follow how the journal publishes its articles. So once you follow that, that just makes it much easier. So particularly in this pandemic time, it's very hard to get referees and reviews done. So it's probably better for everyone to try and help the publishing process, try and help the reviewers, the editors, and ourselves as well, basically as early career academic. In here, basically what I'm talking about is largely academic, Journal of Medicine and Health. So in this case, particularly the historical engagement with the topic is very important. So not only this particular journal or medical history or social of alcohol and drugs where I'm a book reviews editor. So look at the journal and what sort of articles they publish and try to shape your article accordingly. Also, while trying to write an article or like shaping it according to the journal style, um, you should try to work out the best possible way to help the referees. So it's important to check those out and try to uh, help the editors basically and the reviewers. I was also thinking about what sort of articles and like what sort of publishing outlets you have. So yeah, I mean, you shouldn't feel bad if there are rejections because there are many. It's just how it works basically. So there are plenty of good journals, and you should like focus on uh, different journals, not at the same time, obviously, but find out what suits you best and try to get yourself published. We all should do good work, and that's how you get it yourself published, basically. And also, I was thinking about looking at the open access medium. So, in the UK, Skylar or Tony was telling earlier that about the impact factor of journals. In here, we have the REF, Research Excellence Framework. So, impact factor is very important in that particular aspect, but it's changing probably. I don't know what will going to happen in the next 2 years or so, but that's probably the best possible way. I was thinking, so I don't think I have a lot to say in terms of this, but I'm happy to take any other questions if you have about how to publish, how to approach the journal editors, how to send your articles in, and the whole process. But most importantly, I would like to say that just do the basic homework and then approach the journal, and that's probably going to get your articles published quickly as soon as possible and in this particular present situation actually. So that's all I think, and I would like to take more questions after this. Thank you.
Thanks, Arnab. I guess my first immediate reaction is how do you juggle working for the two different journals at the same time?
Medical history is more like every day of an hour or two, basically. So it's like that because it comes through, and I'm I'm the contact person for um, the articles that come in, and the editorial board, and the CUP, and the and the publishing house, basically. For social historical drugs, it's a different way because it's a book reviews. And it's honestly for both the journals, it's pretty slow right now. It's hard to get reviews done. It's getting harder to get people interested or willing to do book reviews in time. So it's this year. It's difficult, really. Yeah, that's all I can say right now.
Well, I'm going to ask you a question, but I'm at the same time I'm going to ask Tony and Kyla the same question, which has to do obviously with the changing landscape. It's changing very rapidly. There's a lot of move towards open access, as has already been mentioned. And I left the UK in 2016 to come to UW Madison. So I was I was getting ready to deal with the ref myself, trying to understand the metricization, the way metrics are applied to different publications in the UK, which is not something that's going on really in the United States, applying stars to a monograph, 3 stars or 4 stars. But that's neither here nor there. Arnab, I wanted to ask you and Kyla and Tony if you had a sort of a specific piece of advice coming from your own personal experience about something that you'd tell authors, something that you would tell peers. And if you don't have anything off the top of your head, maybe Kyla or Tony do.
I don't actually have right now. I have to think about that really. Yeah.
Well, that's fine. Maybe the other two want to weigh in on this.
Sure. So just sort of general advice, Luke?
Yeah, general advice, general thoughts.
Yeah, let's see. And bearing in mind that we are thinking about 2 different sort of kind of types of writing, and not audiences necessarily, but types of writing. I suppose for ourselves as a book publisher, where I know authors can be helpful, and is in helping us help them find their readers. So that's both at the end of when a proposal is. When you submit a proposal, and one of the questions we ask is, who is your readership? Who are you writing this for? It's not everybody. It can't be everybody, no matter how popular. So who specifically, when you think about who your readers are, who you want your readers to be, and there may be primary and secondary levels of readers. So that's we like to know that in a specific way rather than in an unrealistic kind of general way. And where that becomes really important is when at the other end, when we're a few months from publication and we're looking now to begin promotion and knowing where we're going to devote resources to marketing and promoting a book. How can we help you find? There's certain things we can take care of. We have relationships with library wholesalers and reps that look after all of our lists. But how can we also find those readers who might not be captured there, who might not find out about your book through those channels? Are there specific networks that you're part of, or organizations, or is there an area of policy that this speaks to that could help us think, oh yes, we have some contacts there, we just want to make sure there's even a few key people we could inform about your book. So that might take a little bit of work and thought. That's very useful for us, and especially now the way we can use social media and we're active on it in promoting our books and our authors and having those announcements picked up. But just that, so much still happens person to person. The fact that I know Erica and know yourself, and we've met in person at conferences, and this really kind of led us to honestly to the books and to the series we've published. And so there's not to underestimate that power of just telling a person and a person telling somebody else. Yeah.
There seems to be some questions in the chat box for when doing a write-up, shouldn't you have a few journals in mind? Do you just structure your write-up for the #1 journal and then edit accordingly for the others if rejected? I think that could be directed at Arnab or...
Yeah. Right, thanks for the question. So when you're writing an article, it's actually a two-way process, I would say. So when you're writing an article, you write an article, yes, like the way you want to write an article. But then once you are writing an article, you should have a couple of channels in mind, like 2 or 3 channels in mind. Like, okay, I can write like focusing on this particular journal, or 2 or 3 channels basically, and then once it's hard probably if you are focusing on like different country like UK or US centric channels, because it changes a lot. But if you are focusing on 2 or 3 journals based in the UK or in the US, it should follow like a almost similar style. The approach might be different though. So the approach can be tweaked a little bit, like after you have finished the whole article, the first draft maybe, or after you get the first reviews in, then you can do that. So it's like depends on the journal and depends on the countries. If you are like going like focusing on 2 or 3 different journals in different based in different countries, then probably it's difficult. It's probably harder. But if you're focusing on one country and like say, 3 different journals, that shouldn't be an issue really.
Yeah. Yeah. A related question, Artem, comes from Chris Blakely. It's what's your advice for authors in terms of balancing an article's focus to speak to a very narrow subfield and also speak to the broader field of history of medicine?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. Thanks, Chris.
It's a tough one.
Uh, yeah. I probably think about the same thing when I'm writing my articles, actually. So I have thought about it, and particularly medical history, I think although it is targeted towards like history of medicine and well, like very niche field. But there are ways because we talk about global health, and that's probably the way you can focus on and link your article to other um, areas, like broader geographical areas, and that kind of gives you a broader perspective. I think even if your article is talking about a very particular aspect of history, in the conclusion or even in the body, you can like talk about or link it with like other aspects that happens somewhere else in the world. Basically, when you're talking about global health, you can actually focus and uh, make your article interesting to people who doesn't do your or work on your geographical area. So that's probably
Yeah.
how we can do that.
Yeah, I mean, I often struggle to be interesting in writing and in person, so I'm sure I agree. But Tony, I wonder if you can take on Nancy's question. Nancy asks about encouraging people to participate in peer review and the writing of book reviews. I like Richard's response, which is maybe turn book reviews into short videos. But maybe you have other thoughts.
I like that idea. We, with one of our journals, we have someone this is really not the same thing, I guess, but we have somebody who has taken it on themselves to do video abstracts of articles and post them on Twitter and up online, which has been really fun and really great for the journal. I have a non-answer answer. I think that this year is just, in all seriousness, it's just very, very difficult for many, many people. And I think that for our journals that we publish, some of them are just going to be a little bit off schedule in the next year because of what people are dealing with in their personal lives, trying to carry the same workload and having other, family challenges and other things to deal with. So I don't have any like great, wonderful ideas. I think that just to be understanding and maybe reach out to younger scholars for in terms of book reviews. Mm-hmm. And I just really appreciate what Arnab said earlier, that is about kind of tailoring your I guess I mean like working directly with your editorial office and finding out what their needs are, and try, or the other way around, for the editor's office to kind of work with the authors and try, everybody just kind of be a little more flexible and collaborative this year if it's at all possible.
Oh, I totally agree with that. Erica Dick makes the point that as a journal editor with CBMH, they have a steady rate of submissions, but it's been hard to secure reviewers. And she's saying that tips are welcome. At Pharmacy and History and also at SHAD, we've had ups and downs with securing reviewers. A lot more people are saying no these days. At least in the short time that I've been an editor. Richard Del Rio says, departments could also be more engaged in valuing collegiality. I think that probably speaks to tenure and promotion standards that Tony referenced earlier. This might be a good time to turn to the final question that I had for our panelists, considering I don't see any others right now in the box. The final question that I got Tony and Arnab and Kyla to ruminate on was whether or not they were optimistic about the future of academic publishing, and why or why not, besides what we should be watching out for. Kyla, can we start with you? And can we start with your thoughts about being optimistic or not? Hopefully you are.
Honestly, yes. I think I was thinking ahead to that in some of my remarks when I was closing, but it is a challenging time for reasons that have been raised. But I believe that there is a place for the book. So I was speaking up on just about the academic book and about books that come from long research projects and periods of reflection and revising and rewriting and perhaps 2 stages of review, but that are a brick in the wall, and they're there, and others, successive scholars and generations build upon them. Like, I look back to books that I read even in high school. I think those were the first times I used university press books, but I remember those books because they were unlike other books in the public library. I was introduced to footnotes that way, and to the idea of, yeah, but how do you know this is true, and where did you find that out? That the process of peer review, imperfect though it is, it's a subject of kind of experimentation and certainly different points of view. I have been I think it's the most rewarding part of my job, also because it can be the most challenging for the reasons mentioned in finding reviewers and in getting reports. But so often the work that people put in for very little or honorariums are very modest, and is extraordinary. And to see authors then take that up and make their books honestly better. This is now a much better book because of this question being taken up, this gap being filled. That you needed someone else to help you do that. This is really irreplaceable. These are things that take time, but they become part of our collective bibliography and our culture, and so there will always be a place for that. And I read a quote recently. It was an interview, I think, or article with Judith Butler, but she used the term, the phrase, we need to cherish the longer forms. And it was, I think, a reaction against just a lot of what happens in kind of social media debate and how information is exchanged now on other platforms. But I think the idea of cherishing the longer forms, whether that be a long journal article or a book, and kind of spending time with it's very much worth doing.
Yeah, as Arnab and Tony think about optimism, I'll just read out a question from Greg Bond, which is an intriguing one, which is, he says, budgets for journals are tight, but should peer review be compensated labor? Should this seems to be a slightly different incentive than the one that Richard Del Rio raised, where said maybe we could I don't know, incentivize collegiality and peer review through hiring and through how we evaluate our peers in the department. But another way to go could be to pay peer reviewers. This is probably more likely with the for-profit presses than it is for the non-profit presses. I'll say that as the editor of Social History of Alcohol and Drugs, with one special issue, we have done this. We had a peer reviewer read 4 or 5 articles in one go, and it seemed like an incredibly large ask on our part. in a relatively narrow sort of time frame, and so they were compensated for their labor. But it's an intriguing question if this is something that should be the norm moving ahead.
I can say that it is something that we do because as a book publisher, we're often sending out manuscripts that are 75,000 words and much longer. That is a real commitment of time we're asking for on the part of the author. It's a modest honorarium. It's around $150. And we are a not-for-profit press, so this is it's not a large amount, but over many manuscripts, that's a sizable part of our budget. But we feel it's important to do that. However, we also offer, and I'm really happy when authors take up the option of books from our list. So we can offer $300 in books that they can select from our current list, our backlist. And this is as much, it's not a compensation for anyone's time, honestly, given the work that goes into it. It is a thank you, really, to the reviewer.
Yeah. Oh, there's another question. Anything being done by legit publishers to push back against the predatory publishers seeking manuscripts? Anyone have comments on that? Yeah.
I think just from a book publisher point of view, that may not be as problematic as in journal publishing. We just do our job well, and our imprimatur means something. So that's it. Yeah, about our own practicing well and our own reputation. But Tony or Arnav may have another answer.
Yeah, this is Tony. I have some funny experience in that area. We had someone create a somewhat authoritative looking website using the name of one of our journals and taking logos from various places and the editorial board and some content, and it was a predatory site. We sent down a takedown notice, but honestly, it's in another country and there's only so much control we have over those sorts of things. There's no concerted effort that I'm aware of to do so. It's just so important for people to try to do some research when you submit a manuscript and make sure that you are working with a reputable publisher. It's just a terrible, terrible, terrible thing. I really don't have any answers for it.
I mean, I'm sure I'm not alone here, but I mean, I get fairly regular emails asking to publish something for a low fee of $750. We'll publish you in the next week. And so I expect many of you get these types of messages. We're getting close to the end. We're going to have to hold off on Tony and Arnav's thoughts about optimism. So maybe you can reach out to them individually and ask them if they're incredibly negative about the future or if they're positive. Thanks so much for attending this session. Remember, the idea here was to pull back the curtain a little bit and maybe demystify the publishing process from a few different angles. And I'm hopeful that we were able to do that at least to a certain extent. So thanks for your time. Thanks for your questions. And the next panel, I believe, is going to be in half an hour. Oh, yeah, I see. It's coming up right away, 30 minutes. So I'd recommend getting away from your screen if you can, maybe stroll outside for a little while. Once again, thanks so much. See you guys.